Chasing enough, the cost of constant pressure. I first met Eli when I was 32. He was the gardener who tended the grounds of the office complex where I had just been promoted to senior manager. While most people hurried past him without notice, something about his unhurried movements caught my attention one particularly frantic Monday morning. I was racing across the courtyard, late for my third meeting of the day despite arriving before dawn, when I noticed him kneeling beside a small bed of flowers. Unlike everyone else in this place, he moved with a patience that seemed almost defiant in our accelerated world. "Beautiful day," he said without looking up, somehow knowing I had paused despite my hurry. "I wouldn't know," I replied, checking my watch. "I've been inside since sunrise." He nodded as if this made perfect sense, though his slight smile suggested otherwise. Then he said, almost to himself, "The flowers don't grow any faster when I stand over them anxiously." I laughed politely at what I assumed was a quaint gardener's proverb and continued my rush to the meeting. Little did I know this brief exchange would be the first of many conversations that would eventually upend everything I understood about success, effort, and the relentless pursuit of more. In those days, my life operated on a simple equation: extraordinary effort equals extraordinary results. I had crafted this formula through years of validation, scholarships earned through late-night study sessions, promotions secured through 80-hour work weeks, and the growing respect of colleagues who marveled at my capacity for work. I kept a narrow bed tucked away in my office where I occasionally napped rather than waste time commuting home. My refrigerator held nothing but meal replacement shakes and energy drinks. My relationship status was perpetually complicated because, as I explained to disappointed partners, this level of success requires sacrifice. The promotion to senior manager felt less like an achievement and more like the next mandatory step on an endless staircase. The momentary satisfaction lasted approximately 48 hours before my focus shifted to the director position above me. I began strategizing how to secure it within 18 months instead of the typical 3-year timeline. The Tuesday after my encounter with Eli, I was working late. Catching up was how I framed it, though in reality there was never any catching up, only keeping pace. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The office hummed with that particular emptiness that exists in spaces designed for many but occupied by one. I was deep into preparing slides for tomorrow's presentation when a knock startled me. Eli stood at my door holding a small ceramic pot with a single green shoot. "Sorry to disturb," he said. "Security mentioned someone was still working. Thought you might want some company." He placed the pot on my desk. "Snake plant. Thrives on neglect. Perfect for people who forget plants exist." I should have been annoyed at the interruption, but something about his calm presence disarmed my usual defenses. "Do you always work this late?" he asked, settling into the chair across from me without waiting for an invitation. "Success doesn't come from standard hours," I replied, reciting one of the many mantras I'd collected over the years. "And what does success look like for you?" he asked. The question was simple enough, but I hesitated. The director position within 18 months, then SVP within 5 years. And after that? C-suite by 40, CEO by 45 if all goes according to plan. And after that? I felt a flicker of irritation. Then I'll have made it. Made what exactly? Made it to the top. Eli nodded thoughtfully. "And how will you know when you've done enough to deserve being there?" The question landed like a stone dropping into still water. I had prepared for questions about strategy, competition, and execution, not this strange inquiry about enough. "It's not about enough," I explained. "It's about maximizing potential, pushing until you've extracted everything you're capable of." Eli smiled. "Interesting. Nature has no interest in extraction. The natural world operates entirely on the principle of enough. Trees grow until they reach sufficient height to access the sunlight they need, not infinitely upward. Animals hunt until they're satiated, not endlessly. Even rivers eventually find the sea and rest." "People aren't trees or rivers," I said, uncomfortable with where this conversation was heading. "No," he agreed, standing to leave. "People are the only creatures I know who have forgotten how to recognize enough when they find it." He walked to the door, then turned back. "I have a garden at home. Nothing fancy, but peaceful. Perhaps you might visit sometime. It's better than this box." He gestured around my office. I thanked him for the plant and declined the invitation politely, already refocusing on my work before he closed the door. 3 months passed. My team delivered a major project under budget and ahead of schedule, a success by any measure. Yet the expected satisfaction was rapidly displaced by anxiety about the next initiative. During the celebration dinner, while my team toasted our accomplishment, I found myself checking emails and mentally drafting plans for our next project. Later that night, I stood on my apartment balcony, 18 floors above the city. Despite the earlier celebration, a familiar emptiness had settled in. From this height, car headlights formed rivers of light flowing through the urban landscape. I remembered Eli's words about rivers eventually finding the sea and resting. When had I last truly rested? Not the collapsed from exhaustion kind of unconsciousness I fell into most nights, but actual, restorative rest? I couldn't remember. The following Saturday, surprising myself, I drove to the address Eli had scribbled on a slip of paper months earlier. His home was modest, a small cottage on the outskirts of the city with a garden that seemed to occupy more space than the house itself. He showed no surprise at my unannounced arrival, greeting me as if he'd been expecting me all along. "Perfect timing," he said. "The tea is just ready." The garden wasn't meticulously manicured like the corporate grounds. Instead, it had a wild, intentional beauty, plants coexisting in what appeared to be organized chaos. We sat at a weathered wooden table under the dappled shade of an old oak tree. "So," he said, pouring tea from a ceramic pot, "what brings the senior manager to my humble garden on a Saturday?" I found myself unexpectedly honest. "I don't know. Something you said about enough." He nodded, waiting for me to continue. "We completed a major project this week. Everything went perfectly. Yet I felt nothing. Or rather, I felt immediately anxious about the next thing. It's like I can never actually arrive anywhere. I'm just perpetually chasing the next destination." Eli sipped his tea. "Let me show you something." He led me to a section of garden where tomato plants grew in neat rows. Some plants stood nearly 6 feet tall, lush with leaves and heavy with fruit. Others were half that size, spindly, with far fewer tomatoes. "These," he indicated the smaller plants, "I've given every advantage: premium fertilizer, extra water, special soil amendments, constant attention. Those," he pointed to the flourishing plants, "I've given the basics and left alone to do what they naturally do." "That doesn't make sense," I said. "The ones with more care should be thriving." "You would think so," he replied. "But plants, like people, have a point of diminishing returns. Beyond the basics of what they need, additional inputs don't help, they harm. The over-fertilized plants are putting all their energy into leaf growth because I've artificially stimulated them into constant production. They never have a chance to focus on what they're meant to do: produce fruit." He plucked a tomato from one of the thriving plants and offered it to me. "These plants know when enough is enough. They grow until they're stable, produce what they're meant to produce, and don't exhaust themselves trying to become something they're not." I bit into the tomato. The flavor was incomparable to the pale imitations I occasionally grabbed from the office cafeteria salad bar. We walked back to the table, and I found myself sharing details about my life that I had never articulated to anyone: the relentless internal pressure, the moving targets of success, the vague future point where I believed I would finally feel I had arrived. As afternoon stretched into evening, Eli mostly listened. When he did speak, it wasn't with the generic inspirational quotes I'd expected, but with questions that gently undermined the foundations of my carefully constructed worldview. "What if," he asked as I prepared to leave, "your value isn't tied to your productivity?" The question followed me home, a persistent whisper amidst the usual cacophony of my thoughts. That first visit turned into a habit. Over the next year, I found myself returning to Eli's garden almost every other weekend. These visits became islands of calm in my otherwise frantic existence. Occasionally I would help with simple tasks: weeding, harvesting, turning compost, physical work utterly unlike the cerebral gymnastics of my weekdays. Between these weekend retreats, the snake plant from Eli sat quietly on my desk at work, somehow thriving despite my neglect, a silent reminder that some things grow even when not constantly monitored and pushed. I'd often find myself pausing during particularly stressful moments to look at its steady, patient growth. As the seasons changed, Eli introduced me to different aspects of the garden's rhythm. During an early spring visit, he asked me to help him prune an apple tree. As we worked under branches dotted with nascent buds, he explained his approach. "Most amateur gardeners are afraid to cut enough away," he said, demonstrating how to make a clean cut. "They worry about harming the tree, so they make timid cuts. But hesitation actually creates problems. The tree needs significant pruning to direct its energy properly." He handed me the shears and guided my hands. "There. Cut right there, removing this entire branch." I hesitated. "That's a big section with many small branches and buds. Isn't that too much to remove at once?" He shook his head. "This is the paradox. By cutting away more, by limiting where the tree can direct its efforts, we actually increase what it can produce. A tree allowed to grow in every possible direction yields less fruit than one purposefully restrained." As we worked, I couldn't help but see the metaphor for my own life, spreading in too many directions, afraid to prune away opportunities or possibilities for fear of missing something important. The tree doesn't view pruning as failure or loss, Eli remarked, seemingly reading my thoughts. It's simply a redirection of energy to what matters most. That evening, I declined a non-essential project for the first time in my career. The world didn't end. In fact, my manager seemed relieved, noting I already had a full workload. Small changes began accumulating. I started leaving the office by 7 p.m. most evenings. I ignored emails to my phone on Sundays. I scheduled actual lunch breaks instead of eating hurriedly at my desk. Each change felt simultaneously terrifying and trivial, a strange combination that made me realize how distorted my perspective had become. 6 months later, the director position I had coveted opened up. The vice president of our division encouraged me to apply. Citing my team's consistent performance and, surprisingly, my improved leadership presence over the past year. The old me would have thrown everything aside to prepare the perfect application, working through nights and weekends to demonstrate my superior dedication. Instead, I gave it my focused attention during work hours, then set it aside to maintain the fragile balance I'd begun to cultivate. 2 rounds of interviews later, I received the offer. The congratulatory messages poured in, many expressing no surprise given my legendary work ethic. What would have surprised them was how much less I had been working, not more. The following Saturday, I brought a bottle of good wine to Eli's garden to celebrate. "Congratulations," he said when I told him. "Is it enough?" The question stopped me. In the past, the answer would have been an immediate no, just another stepping stone towards some distant enough always hovering beyond reach. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but it feels different this time. I'm pleased, but I don't immediately feel the need to focus on the next promotion." Eli smiled. "That's progress." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "You know," I said eventually, "if someone had told me 2 years ago that working less intensely would lead to greater success, I would have thought they were delusional." "Most wisdom sounds like delusion to those who haven't experienced it firsthand," Eli replied. "You couldn't have understood it then. Some things can't be explained, only experienced." He poured more wine. "The problem wasn't your ambition. Ambition is like water, life-giving in appropriate amounts, destructive when flooding. The problem was losing touch with the concept of enough." "How do you recognize enough when you find it?" I asked, echoing the question he had posed during our first real conversation. "Enough isn't a destination, it's a practice of presence," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "When you're fully engaged with what you're doing right now rather than anxiously reaching for what's next, that's enough. When you feel gratitude instead of scarcity, that's enough." 3 years have passed since that conversation. I'm approaching 40 now, and my perspective has shifted in ways my 32-year-old self would barely recognize. I've advanced in my career, but no longer at the cost of everything else. Perhaps the most profound change has been this: I've finally given myself permission to prioritize my well-being, and to do so without guilt. For years, I believed that self-care was selfish, that boundaries were weakness, that rest was laziness. Every moment not spent striving felt like falling behind. But what I've discovered is that this permission isn't just a kindness to myself, it's a necessity. The anxiety and pressure I once wore like a badge of honor weren't pushing me forward, they were holding me back. When I finally allowed myself to step off the treadmill without self-recrimination, I found something surprising: clarity, creativity, and a steadier kind of ambition, one that didn't require sacrificing my humanity. The guilt didn't disappear overnight. Even now, that old voice sometimes whispers that I should be doing more, achieving more, becoming more. But I've learned to recognize it for what it is: not wisdom, but conditioning. And in those moments, I return to what Eli taught me about enough. I still visit Eli's garden, though now I have a small one of my own. Nothing elaborate, just a few raised beds where I grow vegetables and flowers. Working with my hands in the soil has become a form of meditation, a counterbalance to the abstract nature of my professional work. The promotion I once viewed as merely a stepping stone has become a position I genuinely enjoy. I've stopped mentally racing to the next level and instead focused on deepening my effectiveness where I am. Surprisingly, this shift in focus hasn't diminished my performance, it's enhanced it. I work reasonable hours now. I take actual vacations. I've rebuilt relationships that withered during my years of all-consuming ambition. And strangest of all, I've become known for mentoring younger colleagues about sustainable success, showing them the path I wish someone had shown me. Last week, I noticed a new junior manager, Maya, working late every evening. For weeks, I'd seen her light still on when I left, the same hunger in her eyes I had once warned myself. I recognized in her the same intensity that had driven me, the conviction that success requires perpetual sacrifice, that stopping even briefly means falling behind. On Friday, I stopped by her desk on my way out. She looked up, clearly expecting some urgent request that would extend her day even further. Instead, I placed a small potted plant beside her computer, a snake plant, just like the one Eli had given me years ago. Thrives on neglect, I told her, perfect for people who forget plants exist. She smiled politely, clearly eager to return to her work. I have a garden, I added. Nothing fancy, but peaceful. Perhaps you might visit sometime. It's better than this box. Her expression suggested she thought this was a strange invitation from a senior colleague, but she nodded politely. I didn't press further. After all, wisdom can sound like delusion to those who haven't experienced it firsthand. Some things can't be explained, only experienced. As I walked to my car, I thought about the long, circuitous path I had taken to discover a truth that nature demonstrates constantly: the relentless pursuit of more inevitably costs too much. True success lies not in constant acceleration but in knowing when to ease up, when to rest, when to simply be present with what you've already achieved. 3 weeks later, a hesitant knock on my office door surprised me. It was Maya, the junior manager, holding the snake plant I had given her. Its single stem had now sprouted a new shoot. "It's growing," she said, a mix of surprise and pride in her voice. I smiled. "They do that, even when you're not watching." She stood awkwardly for a moment, then asked, "Is that garden offer still open? I've been thinking about what you said." She paused, then added more quietly, "I can't remember the last time I saw a sunset that wasn't through my apartment window." I felt a familiar cycle completing itself, the student becoming the teacher, the recipient becoming the giver. "Sunday afternoon," I said. "I'll text you the address. Bring nothing but yourself." As she left, I glanced at the snake plant on my own desk, now thriving after years of minimal attention. It had been with me through 2 promotions, a dozen work crises, and countless late nights, but unlike me, it had known its limits all along. In the gentle evening light, I felt a profound gratitude for the lessons Eli and his garden had taught me, especially the most important one. After years of chasing enough, I had finally realized it wasn't something to pursue at all. It was something to recognize when it was already present. And in that moment, with the promise of passing on what I had learned to someone who needed it just as badly as I once had, I knew without question. This was enough.